It's just past 7:30 p.m. across India. Live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India Global. We'll get your top stories from India and the region. I'm Tanvi Taneja, and for news from the rest of the world, I'm joined by my colleague in Washington, D.C., Kate Fisher. Kate, good evening from New Delhi.
Good morning, Tanvi. It's 10 a.m. here in Washington, D.C. and 3 in the afternoon across Central Europe. Coming up in the next 30 minutes. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is back in the Middle East to try to negotiate a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war. And fresh from the St. Patrick's Day celebrations, Ireland's Prime Minister Leo Varadkar announces his surprise resignation. Now back to Tanvi with the rest of the day's headlines.
India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi discusses the Ukraine crisis with Russia's President Vladimir Putin and Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky over telephonic conversation, reiterates the need for dialogue to end the conflict. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken begins his 6th trip to the Middle East to secure a truce deal between Israel and Hamas. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz says ceasefire in Gaza looking more realistic. And Indian origin Leo Varadkar steps down as Ireland's Prime Minister, citing both personal and political reasons. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Russian President Vladimir Putin held a telephonic conversation on Wednesday. India's Prime Minister congratulated Putin on his re-election as the President of Russia. The two leaders agreed to make concerted efforts towards further strengthening the special and privileged strategic partnership between the two countries in the years to come. Both the leaders also reviewed progress in various issues of bilateral cooperation and exchanged views on regional and global issues of mutual interest. While discussing the Russia-Ukraine conflict, Prime Minister Modi reiterated India's consistent position in favour of dialogue and diplomacy as the way forward. The two leaders agreed to remain in touch. Soon after, India's Prime Minister also held a telephonic conversation with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. The two leaders discussed ways to further strengthen India-Ukraine partnership in various spheres. India's Prime Minister Modi called for dialogue and diplomacy for the ongoing conflict. He added that India would continue to do everything within its means to support a peaceful solution to the conflict. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky appreciated India's continued humanitarian assistance for the people of Ukraine. The two leaders agreed to remain in touch. One person has died and two were injured as a result of Ukrainian shelling in Russia's Belgorod region on Wednesday. Russia is evacuating some 9,000 children from the region which borders Ukraine. Local Governor V. Gladkov said that the relocation will start this Thursday as Ukrainian attacks have intensified. DD India's Dasha Chernyshova has more from Moscow.
First 1,200 children will be relocated from Belgorod region on Thursday, following the intensification of the Ukrainian attacks against Russia's border region. According to the local governor, Vyacheslav Gladkov, the children will be moved to Penza, Tambov and Kaluga regions that are deeper in the Russian territory. He also said that at the moment, the total of 9,000 children have requested to be relocated from the region and that all requests will be accommodated soon. He said that the region has been relocating children for 2 years already. He also urged those who haven't left the territories located closest to the border with Ukraine to think about temporary relocation. On Wednesday, Russian President Vladimir Putin thanked Belgorod residents for their courage and promised to support them. He said the key was to ensure safety and promised Russia would respond to the Ukrainian attacks. Earlier this week, he said that a buffer zone will need to be created on the border with Ukraine to protect civilians against long-range strikes and cross-border raids. Authorities have introduced checkpoints in several border areas to ensure safety of the civilians. Dasha Chernashova in Moscow, reporting for GD India.
Further, Russian President Vladimir Putin has vowed a strong response to the recent shelling of Russia's Belgorod region.
The primary task is to ensure security. There are different ways. They are not easy, but we will do it. I have already spoken about it. I do not want to go into details in this festive surroundings, but we will continue working on it. We can respond with the exact same things, civilian infrastructures and all the similar targets that the enemy is striking.
Now, Polish farmers have intensified protests against the European Union over environmental regulations and cheap food imports from Ukraine. On Wednesday, the EU reached a provisional deal to extend tariff-free access to Ukrainian food producers' markets until June 2025. The recent agreement would include new limits on grain imports and safeguards for other products. The protesting farmers are not in line with the recent deal, as it includes the last few years as a reference for import limits. Meanwhile, Czech farmers also obstructed a crossing into neighbouring Germany on Wednesday, joining their counterparts in Poland and elsewhere. Farmers with at least 50 tractors blocked the border close to the village of Strasne, leading to Germany. On to West Asia now. Hopes for a ceasefire in the nearly 6-month-old conflict between Israel and Hamas are still alive. Well, that's the task at hand for US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. My colleague Kate Fisher is in Washington, D.C. She gives us more on this and other stories making headlines around the world. Kate, Blinken on his 6th Middle East mission now to resolve this conflict.
That's right, Tanvi, thank you. Yes, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken arriving in Saudi Arabia on Wednesday, as you say, marking his 6th visit to the Middle East since the Israel-Hamas conflict began. And the US's top diplomat is scheduled to meet Saudi leaders in Jeddah and Egyptian leaders in Cairo to push for a ceasefire. Antony Blinken will focus on efforts to deliver more aid into Gaza, and talks on a truce brokered by Egypt and Qatar are resuming this week in Qatar. Well, in Germany, in an address to the parliament, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said that a ceasefire in Gaza is looking more realistic now, so as to allow more humanitarian aid into the enclave.
I
don't want to give false hope here, but my impression right now is a little bit that chances are more realistic than they have been for a long time, even if we are far from success. But it would be good for it to happen now, in this situation. I, for my part, encourage everyone to make their contribution to quickly find an agreement.
Well, let's get more from the Middle East now, and we can cross live to DD India's Alex Kadier, who joins us from Amman in Jordan. Alex, another big push from the US, from the Biden administration here, sending Antony Blinken back to the Middle East to try to broker this ceasefire. But what are the chances really looking like for this?
Well, we heard, Kate, that there is cautious optimism from those mediators. The Qatari Foreign Ministry spokesperson, Majid Al-Ansari, saying that just yesterday, that it is a source of cautious optimism that the talks are ongoing, in that at the first hurdle, that's the high-level talks where David Barnea, the head of the Israeli intelligence agency, the Mossad, was in Doha, those discussions carried on into technical discussions. So the head of the Mossad has now left Doha, we understand, and those technical teams, those Israeli officials working with the mediators, trying to work out the detail. And we've heard just today from the UK Foreign Secretary as well, David Cameron, Lord Cameron, saying that a ceasefire is urgently needed, but a lot of details are yet to be worked out. And all we have in the way of details for now, Kate, is really a sense of Hamas's last counter proposal. That would be the release of 40 hostages, women, elderly and injured hostages, Israelis being held in inhuman conditions in Gaza in exchange for 700 to 1,000 Palestinian prisoners across a 6-week ceasefire. Now, we know that number of prisoners is deemed too high by Israeli officials, who say they will not accept that high number, but that proposal is something that they can work with, and that is exactly what's going on now, Kate.
And Alex, what about the humanitarian situation? Just how dire is it there on the ground? And do you think there's any chance that these talks will result in more aid getting to the people who need it so desperately?
Well, there's certainly a tremendous amount of international pressure on Israel to allow that humanitarian aid to flow in without any friction. We've heard from Volker Turk, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, just in the last 24 hours, saying that Israel's restrictions on humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip could represent a breach of international law and could be as far as representing a war crime. We know, for example, that the International Court of Justice, following South Africa's petition, has ordered Israel to allow humanitarian aid to flow in without restrictions. Now, the Israelis say they allow large amounts of aid to go in through land, through sea, through air, but we've seen a lot of difficulties in those airdrops because, of course, it is a very technical thing to do, and the quantities that you can airdrop into the Gaza Strip are very limited. We've seen the maritime corridor just taking ship, with those first 200 tons being unloaded from World Central Kitchen. But again, before that's up and running, could be at least another month. And clearly the situation on the ground is absolutely catastrophic. The United Nations saying that within a matter of weeks, all of northern Gaza will be facing complete famine, and that the rest of the Gaza Strip will also be facing very, very, very high levels of hunger, leading to children dying of malnutrition and dehydration. So that urgency is there. On the one hand, the Israelis say they are letting aid flow into the Gaza Strip. On the other hand, you have aid organizations saying it's not nearly fast enough and not getting in nearly quickly enough. So you will continue to see that international pressure building. The other thing to say, Kate, is that an operation in Rafah, which the Israelis have said they will absolutely go ahead with, would be a real changing point, both in the ceasefire negotiations. We've heard the Qataris say it could scupper the ceasefire negotiations, and for the humanitarian situation, which would make it far, far worse. The United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Germany, other of Israel's allies saying very clearly an operation in Rafah cannot go ahead. The Israelis say they'll still go in there, and the humanitarian consequences will be dire.
Alex Carrier in Amman, Jordan, thank you. Well, the Israeli military on Wednesday said that it killed 90 terrorists at Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital and also arrested 160 terrorists for questioning. Israel said the raid at Gaza's largest medical facility was based on intelligence that it was being used by terrorists. In northern Gaza, an IDF aircraft struck an operational Hamas tunnel shaft, while in southern Gaza, security forces eliminated 3 terrorists and struck terrorist sites during operations in Khan Yunis. Israeli forces also killed 6 terrorists in Jabalia. Irish Prime Minister Leo Varadkar has announced his resignation on Wednesday as Ireland's Prime Minister and the leader of the governing Fine Gael party. In a surprise move, Varadkar said he's stepping down as the head of the three-party coalition for both personal and political reasons. The move doesn't automatically trigger a general election, and he's asked for a new leader to be chosen on April the 6th, allowing a new Prime Minister to take office after the Irish Parliament's Easter break.
So I am resigning as President and leader of Fine Gael effective today, and will resign as Taoiseach as soon as my successor is able to take up that office. I've asked our Party General Secretary and Executive Council to provide for the new leader to be elected in advance of the Ardèche on Saturday, April 16th, thus allowing a new Taoiseach to be elected when the Dáil resumes after the Easter break. I know this will come as a surprise to many people and a disappointment to some, and I hope at least you will understand my decision.
Well, tensions in Haiti are escalating amid gang wars that are paralysing the Caribbean nation. On Tuesday, an alleged gang leader who escaped from Port-au-Prince prison on Tuesday called on his supporters to retake control of the Carrefour Fur neighbourhood, which was lost to an enemy gang after his arrest in June 2022. Esquiel Alexandre was arrested on allegations of murder, illegal possession of firearms and armed robbery. To Africa, where unrest in Sudan continues as unidentified youth in the Pibor region shot dead 15 people on Tuesday. According to an official, the region's commissioner was also killed in the latest flare-up in the country. Since the 2018 peace deal, routine clashes among a patchwork of armed groups have continued to kill and displace large numbers of civilians. Well, DD India's Patrick Oye reports from South Sudan's capital, Juba.
A county commissioner and his bodyguards were killed when their convoy was ambushed on their return from a village to the local government headquarters. A deputy army commander and his close security officials who were part of the commissioner's team also died. Local authorities say 4 people survived the attack but sustained injuries. South Sudan has a very high prevalence of light weapons and small arms in the hands of people without licenses, according to the United Nations. The government's attempt to disarm civilians has not been successful due to civil war in its neighboring countries, which makes it easy for weapons to come into the country. Local government officials say the attackers are suspected to be armed youth in the area. However, no one has yet been arrested in connection with the killings. South Sudan's government says it has formed a committee to investigate the incident. Patrick Oyet in Juba reporting for DD India.
Well, that's all from me here in Washington. Now time to head back to Tanvi in New Delhi.
Thank you very much, Kate. Always a pleasure doing this show with you. Still to come on DD India Global. A massive explosion in a coal mine in Pakistan kills 12 miners. And India's 44-day-long electoral process begins with the country's election commission notifying the first phase of general elections.
पेमेंट फेल लेकिन पैसे तो कट गए गई मेरी मेहनत की कमाई
हो जाएगी भरपाई चिंता मत कर मेरे भाई अगर डिजिटल ट्रांजैक्शन फेल हो जाए और अकाउंट से पैसे कट जाएं तो बैंक समय से पैसे लौटा देगा वरना कॉम्पनसेशन का है प्रावधान नहीं तो आरबीआई के ओम्बुड्समैन को शिकायत करें आप
योर बिल
मेरी फीस आरबीआई कहता है
जानकार बनिए सतर्क रहिए
Welcome back. You're watching DD India Global. I'm Tanvi Taneja. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi attended the country's largest and first of its kind startup event called the Startup Mahakumbh in New Delhi on Wednesday. Prime Minister Modi said that India's startup ecosystem is flourishing at an unprecedented pace. DD India's Tapas Bhattacharya has more.
Startup Mahakumbh 2024, where innovation meets opportunity and entrepreneurship thrives. In this journey of discovery, Prime Minister Narendra Modi addressed the entrepreneurs and stakeholders, heralding India's remarkable strides in the world of startups. PM hailed India's startup journey.
आज जब देश 2047 के विकसित भारत के रोड मैप पर काम कर रहा है, अब हम भारत में इनोवेशन और स्टार्टअप कल्चर का ट्रेंड लगातार बढ़ता हुआ देख रहे हैं।
The Startup Mahakumbh, held at Bharat Mandapam in New Delhi, has ignited a fire of creativity and collaboration with its resounding theme of Bharat Innovates. PM Modi said that India has more than 1.25 lakh startups, 110 unicorns.
देश ने स्टार्टअप इंडिया अभियान के तहत इनोवेटिव आइडियाज को एक प्लेटफॉर्म दिया, उनको फंडिंग के सोर्स से कनेक्ट किया। हमारा स्टार्टअप इकोसिस्टम सिर्फ बड़े मेट्रो शहर तक सीमित नहीं है, ये देश के 600 से अधिक जिलों तक पहुंच चुका है। इसका मतलब है ये एक सामाजिक कल्चर बन गया है।
From deep tech to agri-tech, biotech to medtech, AI to gaming, the confluence of stakeholders and experts promises to propel emerging sectors to new heights. PM Modi also stressed on the 1 lakh crore fund announced for the research and innovation in interim budget that will help sunrise sectors. India's startup ecosystem not limited to metro cities. It has now become a social culture. With over 2,000 startups, 1,000 plus investors and 100 plus unicorns, the Startup Mahakumbh is India's largest and first of its kind startup extravaganza.
The Startup Mahakumbh is designed to foster innovation and entrepreneurship across India, focusing on the government's agenda to boost emerging sectors such as deep tech, agri-tech, biotech, medtech and AI. The integration of an aspirational India with the startup sector will propel India's economy during the Amrit Kal and make India a developed nation by 2047. With camera person Vicky, this is Taposh Bhattacharya for DD India from Delhi.
India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be on a two-day visit to Bhutan starting Thursday to underscore the growing ties between the two nations. This visit highlights India's commitment to deepening its strategic partnership with Bhutan, a valued neighbour and friend. More from our correspondent Amritpal Singh.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi arrives here in Bhutan on Thursday morning for a two-day state visit. He'll meet with the King of Bhutan, Jigme Khesar Namgyal Wangchuk. He'll also meet the King's father and former King Jigme Singye Wangchuk. He'll hold discussions with his Bhutanese counterpart, Shering Tropge, who just concluded a 5-day visit to India a few days back. During this visit, the Prime Minister will receive Bhutan's highest civilian honor that was conferred upon him or announced by the Bhutanese government in 2021. During this visit, the Prime Minister on Friday shall be inaugurating a 150-bed state-of-the-art mother and child hospital which has been built with Indian funding. This visit of the Prime Minister to Bhutan is in keeping with the regular high-level exchanges between the two sides, as also the Modi government's focus on neighbourhood first policy. With cameraman YK Loknath, this is Amritpal Singh for DD India in Thimphu.
And now let's get you the latest on what's happening in India in the run-up to the world's largest democratic election. India's 44-day-long electoral process begins on Wednesday with the Election Commission of India issuing the notification for the first phase of election. Voting for 102 Lok Sabha constituencies across 17 states and 4 union territories will take place on 19th of April. The last date for filing of nominations is 27th of March. The 2024 elections will be conducted in 7 phases, with the final phase scheduled for June the 1st. Counting of votes will take place on 4th of June. And next we take a look at what else is happening across the world. A massive methane gas explosion was reported at a coal mine in southwest Pakistan on Wednesday. According to officials, 12 miners were killed in the explosion. The mine workers have complained that a lack of safety gear and poor working conditions are the key causes of frequent accidents in the region. Kremlin criticized the International Olympic Committee's decision to ban Russia's athletes from the Olympic parade in July. Spokesperson Dmitry Peskov stressed that it was a violation of the athletes' interests that ran against the entire ideology of the Olympics. Residents of Iraq's city of Najaf struggle with water pollution as they raise concerns over the shortage of natural clean water. According to experts, much of the potable water supply is contaminated via sewage. The water is unfit for consumption as it also contains heavy metals that can cause diseases. While many residents have resorted to buying clean water from the markets, some of the city's water is getting treated at filtering water stations. And as we wind up this edition of DD India Global, we take you to Greece, where the Attica Zoological Park has welcomed a rare and endangered pygmy hippopotamus for the first time in 10 years. Pygmy hippos are native to swamps and rainforests in Western Africa. So that's it in this edition of DD India Global. Do let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. Connect with us on Facebook, X, formerly Twitter and Instagram. You can also find us online at ddindia.co.in. I'm Tanvi Taneja from my entire team in New Delhi. Thank you for watching. Namaskar.